Pasha Paroh, Y7. Thank you for tuning. Today I got with me Joshua Cameron, remote healer, wonderful guy I met in some analytics relationships. Was on his show a week ago. You may have seen that. Josh, say hi to people.
Hey, what's up? Hey man, I really appreciate you having me, Pasha. I think this will be a lot of fun. I enjoyed our conversation and I'm curious to see where this conversation goes.
Always a perfect day. I appreciate you being here. You had mentioned a phrase called, well, not called, right? I'm giving it a title. The phrase was inclusive perfection. Can
Hmm.
you speak on that for a minute? What is inclusive perfection
I think
as you
somebody
see it?
mentioned inclusive perfection. I was responding to it. And the thing is I don't know that my mind can fully detail out what that would be, right? Maybe inclusive perfection is just being able to accept the fact that people are flawed because we ourselves are flawed. And then therefore we can just allow our neighbor to just be who they are. And I think that's probably the closest thing. Inclusive as far as political goes, I just don't think that's possible because most people who draw a line politically that say this is what should be inclusive are typically like yelling or doing something demonstrable that doesn't suggest inclusivity, right?
Okay. So when we look at the Cambridge definition, right, we're gonna start off not with the etymology, but just the Cambridge Dictionary's version. For the definition of inclusion, it's the act of including someone or something as part of a group, list, etc., or a person or thing that is included. But when you look at the etymology, the word include 1402 meant to conceal or hide. Later, it became to comprise or contain. So skipping over to the word perfect, because I got this saying it's always the perfect day. So I was really like, oh man, I wonder how this, right? So perfect was originally in 1300 an adjective that meant fully formed, faultless. So then you wind up
Mm.
with something along the lines of like on the etymology side, concealed faultlessness, if you want to put that on there, right? Kind of speaks more like your people having flaws and just accepting them. What is it? How does the terminology now help shape your perspective of that term, inclusive perfection?
The first thing that actually popped in my head is I wonder if in the 1300s, if they used hide in the same way that we would use contain, right? I hid it in the jar, right?
Good question. Good question. Good
And
question.
so
I, you know,
that's
I keep it close. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so I'm curious how the language was used because language changes over time. And I think that's what not that this would necessarily get me in danger in this particular situation, but I
Mm-hmm.
think that often when we're young and we are so full of our own belief that we're right, it's because we are using modern linguistics to look at an ancient phrase. And so we put a lot of projections on that because especially with the way that slang influences language as well.
Yeah, most of the language nowadays is slang, and that's why I do this here in this fashion is to help people understand that the words we use every day mean something totally different. So to quench your palate, hide was a verb, conceal.
Ah,
1121. It
so
was to be
they
hidden.
just it's a circular logic where they just point at each other.
Well, that's the gift and the curse of the English language. It's
Yeah,
equivocal, which
yeah.
means to with the purpose to deceive, right? This is why I like that you're the first person on here that I've talked to in the last like 3 years that said that. So I really appreciate you bringing that thought to ask to the question to the table.
Hey, you're welcome, man. And to be honest, I think it's because of um, I'm very enamored with Eastern philosophy and
Mm.
Eastern, ancient Chinese philosophy, whether it be Taoism, whether it be Zen koans. They're meant to get you to question, like, did I just see what I just saw? Is what I'm thinking the actual reality,
Mhm.
or am I actually supposed to experience it and not think? And so often I assume that if I have a first thought, I'll think, well, is there something counter to this? right? Could there be a different way to approach that? And it could also be because, I mean, specifically in the Tao, it talks about how, speaking of hiding, right, what you can't see, it talks about being is what we work with, but non-being is what we use, right? So like we shape clay into a jar, but it's the empty space that holds, right? That holds or hides, right? What we need. We use wood to construct a house, but it's the inner space that allows us to live and where we live and where we're hiding in our house, where we're concealed. And so that's probably why it just kind of clicked in that thought, at least. But hard to say one way or the other. But I like the thought experiment.
Yeah, this is a great exercise. So you reach a great segue point, because one of the questions I have is how often, generally speaking, do people we like something before we ask what's in it, like food, and then you're like, oh, what's the recipe? Cars, don't care until you get the repair bill. Like, oh snap, I didn't realize it's gonna be 12 grand. You know what I mean? Like you said, the house, things like that. How often do we like something before we care about what's inside of it?
Mm,
Inclusive
well,
perfection.
yeah, okay. And so I like what where do you go with that? Inclusive perfection is just that you would just allow it to be flawed in its way and just love it anyway.
Or is it even flawed to begin with? Because the perfection part, right? Some of the synonyms, right? Because perfection was fully formed. So some of the synonyms for the theme of fully formed, you got like full scale, fully developed, complete, total, comprehensive, maximal. So is a day complete despite what one's accomplished
Hmm.
in
Well,
said
what about
period
a
of time?
yeah, or even a dwarf, right? A dwarf is fully complete, right? So they're perfect in dwarfism, and as a dwarf could be, but wouldn't necessarily fit the model of completion or perfect completion to a non-dwarf, right? To I guess a regular person.
Do you like char marks on a steak or like a grilled dog or
Yeah,
anything like that?
yeah.
So who was the first person to say it's done, but it's not done yet? See, inclusive perfection.
Oh,
It's
okay.
fully
Yeah.
right.
Mhm. Right.
Same
It's
thing with
because
a plan
the
or
meat
idea.
itself could be done, but it doesn't have the char mark, so it's not done yet.
Hmm. So I like when you brought up people's flaws though, because when you have a plan, and I'm always the one to be like, I have this vision of said description that the flaws that people think are flaws in themselves and others are actually part of their perfection. And I think that inclusive perfection is a great wrapping paper for that concept. So speak on that for a moment, especially from the remote healer aspect. Is a flaw in a person always a flaw?
Um, so I think that it becomes a flaw in the sense of something bad for you when you decide it's bad for you, right? When you start using words like normal, which mean nothing, right? There's 7 billion people in the world, and there's probably 7 billion different definitions of normal. So the
Hmm.
second that you start judging yourself as normal, right? And then looking at somebody else who most likely has no idea what the hell they're doing, right? They're likely just as flawed as anyone else. They're likely making all the mistakes and, led up to this. Why? Because our society does it to us, from a young age. Hey, Pasha, what do you want to be when you grow up? Hey, Pasha, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, little did you know that these people who are 20, 30, 40 years older than you, who are asking you this question, they have no idea, right?
Right.
Right. They have no idea what they're doing. And they put that, and so we, I think there's a certain trauma that we pass down, and it's like, and it manifests itself in kind of a craziness of sorts, dementia of sorts, in that we continue doing and playing these games, these psychological, you could argue harmful games on people, and we put really unfair expectations on people as if they should just know it. right? You should just know what you want to be when you grow up, even though literally nobody who's twice, 3 times your age knows what the hell they're doing. And it's quite strange. It's quite strange the way that we treat people. So again, a flaw is a flaw when you decide it's a flaw, because as Bruce Lee said, be careful how you talk to yourself, because your body doesn't know the difference. Your body's going to listen anyway.
It's a great point. And the whole concept of what do you want to be when you grow up, you can't have a journey that passes through different counties or states, if that's a great analogy or not. Like today I'm in this state. I'm this today. Like I started off not, let's say somebody says I started off in finance and then I said, F that, I wound up in welding, and then that became whatever it became. Then you start your own business and it might be something totally different. Like the assignment of what do you want to be in life. So that leads me to this question, because in those courses, right? When is a plan or idea fully developed? When do you achieve inclusive perfection in a plan or an idea?
So I think it's going to depend on your field. In the tech field, they have what's called the MVP, the minimum viable product. And that's, effectively going to be the fully fleshed out idea. And then what you do is you build it to where it's, again, minimally viable, and where the rules break down and it generates an error, well, then you solicit user feedback. So you crowdsource, right, the information necessary to be able to make it better. And so that's probably the best answer, because of the way that time goes on. We become different people, right? The person Pasha was 10 years ago is not the same, right? This is a different person I'm looking at, and the Pasha who dies is not going to be the one I'm looking at right now, because you just transform to a different person, and different people have different needs. And so you need some sort of open communicative feedback that allows the system to be informed and then improve upon the needs of, whatever the base is.
Great overlay into the human life aspect of it, with that question. So all of that comes to now, because this one of the synonyms for fully formed was complete. So what is complete? When is a person completely healed?
Completely healed? That's a good question. I guess how I felt that I was quote unquote completely healed was, here we go. Alan Watts. I'm a big Alan Watts nerd. So let me share with you a parable that Alan Watts, and this is effectively, because I'd give you the answer, but it wouldn't really make it sense. So let me give it to you this way. So Alan Watts talks about how, because we're different people and we forget that, well, we typically just drag our past along with us. And think of it as like kind of like just dragging a plow, or better yet, a rail car, like a train car, or like a freight train. And each car represents a different phase in that person's life that they're just kind of dragging along with them. And they feel that when they want to change their lives or change, that they need to deal with who they were and unpack that car and then shunt it in the side, from the rear car to the next, to the next, to the next. But the real way to heal and the real way to become your true self is to understand that the simplest way of unpacking those freight cars is just to uncouple from the very front one. And then you realize that now, right, then the eternal now is actually what I can affect. I can't affect anything in the past, right? The future is as much as an illusion as the past is. And if I'm in the now and I'm the person who I am now, well, that's where I think completeness and real healing comes, because I came from a place where I used to beat myself up a lot, because I was raised in a way where I shouldn't, I really had to hide a lot, hide from the monsters, right? The drunken alcoholic rage monster, got Hulk out monsters. And what happened there was the survival mechanism of where I kind of chameleonized and just shut up and didn't say anything because the T-Rex won't see me if I don't move. It blew up in my face when I went to school because the shy kid gets picked on. And so I dealt with a lot of things and, dealt with a lot of shame because everywhere I'd go, I'd get picked on, right? Whether it be by, rage monster parents or, kids at school. And so I didn't have a lot of self-respect, or I didn't really feel good about myself. So I would really lambaste myself a lot and I'd flog myself, right? Self-flatulation, if you will. And when I no longer drag that along with me, I think and I felt I could actually feel my energy open up. I think that's when I realized I was fully healed to the approximation that I know what that actually means.
Thank you for sharing that. Do you think that people, especially, well, people of all ages, but especially in those youth scenarios, do you think there's a good portion of uh, the youth experiencing those, being bullied or whatever, because they're accepting the inclusive perfection in the other person to the point where they accept it because they're actually trying to prevent the serial killer inside of them from being unleashed? Like, if you respond to the bully, you might not stop.
I think it's an interesting question. I'm sure that there are some Hodors out there, if you're familiar with the phrase, like the Game of Thrones Hodor, that there's just
Elaborate,
these.
please.
Okay, so
Elaborate on
in
that.
Game of Thrones, there's this giant guy named Hodor who's
Mhm.
just very soft spoken. He won't really stand up for himself. But if you got him mad, that guy could bulldoze over a dozen people and just smash their faces. For me though, that wasn't it, right? It was I accepting, a perfect inclusion. Certainly not the way I would have looked at it. I think that there was a certain amount of perfect inclusivity in that. The way the universe works, it seems, is that since thoughts are energy and thought, and we put these thoughts out. Think of yourself as like a pillar, or an obelisk in a pond of water. And as you send these thoughts out, well, they ripple out. And when they get to the shore, well, then all they do is they just go right back to source. And so it's not that we're being treated badly because of our thoughts. We're being treated badly by our thoughts, right? And when we realize that happiness is just a byproduct of happy thoughts, well, then the universe will give you the input to show that that's the right thing. You're exactly right. So what you think, right? The idea of think and grow rich, right? Napoleon Hill. Think and whatever you label wealth, whether it be wealth of your family or just wealth of just feeling happy. And your thoughts will make you feel rich. Your thoughts will make you feel happy. Your thoughts will make you feel sullen, make you feel terrible. Just depends on, whatever you put your focus on, it magnifies.
Absolutely. The fractal universe syndrome. So the more we focus on any one point in time and space, the more it expands. So with that being said, what voided politics? You expressed earlier that, like, no, we're going out. But what voided politics from the term inclusive perfection?
Yeah. So inclusivity, I think now means that you're a bigot the second that you make me need to clutch my pearls. Does that make sense?
All
Right?
day long.
Yeah. And so the second that you say something that gets me like, oh dear me, right? And clutch my pearls and clutch my, my man bag, then somehow you're at fault. And not just that you're at fault, but that you're a terrible human being. And it's such an overreaction. And here's an interesting thing that happened to me. So as a healer, you just get weird things happen to you. And again, you attract weirdness. And so it's at the gym, and I go to the steam room a lot. And went in there one day, and there's this giant dude, probably 4 or 5 inches taller than me. His biceps are like half the size of my head. And I like to put a little rag over the thermostat so it just really, gets going. And I was about to do that. And he said, "Hey man, don't do that." Well, why not? Because it says right there that you're not supposed to. And I know that it didn't. It's like, okay. So I just turned the hose on and I just sprayed the heck out of it and just fired it right up. And so it lasted maybe 30 seconds, less than if I would have put the rag on it.
Mhm.
Anyway, he bounces out of there and I do my routine. I do my steam room, then I go and swim in the pool for a little bit. So I'm swimming in the pool, and one of the guys who work there comes like, "Oh, it's you." I was like, "Hey man, just be careful putting that rag up on there because it can overheat the elements and it causes problems."
I
Hey,
would
yeah,
have
no
told
problem.
him.
And as he's telling me this guy who was in there, biceps half the size of my head comes in. You need to be considerate of other people. And it's like, bro, you're screaming at me that I need to be considerate. And so like the absurdity there was silly. Well, and then about 4 days later, I show up to the steam room again. Same guy shows up and he follows me in. He's like, "Hey man, I was really hoping I'd run into you. I wanted to apologize. I don't know why I treated you the way I did. No excuse, but I just found out that my daughter was molested. It happened like 2 years before, but he just found out that day. So for him, it just happened that day."
Hmm.
And he was going on and on and on. I'm on like 6 different medications and this and this. And I finally just pattern interrupt and say, "Hey man, what if I had an opportunity to show you that magic is actually real?" And he's like, "Dude, I'll try anything." I said, "Go ahead and close your eyes." I took him through a 5-minute meditation in the steam room as the thing's just blazing and had him crying, man. This giant dude just had him crying, just releasing a lot of crap and just, let that stuff go. Right. There's nothing you can do. You murder somebody, that's only going to hurt your daughter more because dad's now going to be taken away. Um, and so that anger, if it can't be, cast out, often is cast in, and it kind of becomes a bit of a rot and a gangrene.
So what you just mentioned there about it, if it can't be broadcast out, because we're supposed to be broadcasting and receiving frequencies. If there's something blocking it from going out, it must be reflected back inside, right? And then amplify almost like a laser beam. If you were to concentrate it, it would become more powerful. So one way or another, everything is going to develop or fully develop or scale or become complete or take out, like you said, that jar, become the total jar. So the irony in what the guy said, though, and it made me think about other um, interactions people probably have on a daily basis, is when he was telling you what you couldn't do, and then followed that with, "You should be more considerate of other people," in his yelling voice, right?
Yeah.
would would being considerate actually have included an inclusive perfection? Him asking you why you were doing it so that he could learn what the goal was, or what the development you were after, or what the completion you were looking for, or the totality of your actions, instead of telling you that you were wrong. What do you think about that?
I like the question. So let me ask you though, would it make sense for a 14-year-old to hold a 5-year-old accountable to not acting like a 14-year-old?
No, I mean, no, right?
And so,
Yes and no.
so a
If you give them the
14-year-old
opportunity and they don't
would have the
believe you would,
opportunity to hold a 5-year-old accountable to being a 14-year-old, but it's completely unfair. And so
mhm.
if you think of it, this way, that we all come from different levels of progression and different stages in life. And if you think of it like a tree, some people are acorns, man, and they're the perfect acorn and they need a lot of learning and they need a lot of love. And the people who are the hardest to love are the ones who need it the most. And then you've got the saplings, and then you've got the small tree and the fully fledged tree. And can the fully fledged tree really cast judgment upon the acorn? Well, the acorn, if given the opportunity, will also turn into a tree.
Exactly. So if given the opportunity, and that was the statement um that I was giving earlier. If it's like you, it's just like with people, because when I look at regular people, right? Just regular people in general. Look at certain people's level of consciousness or awareness or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it, right? other people or knowledge of this subject or knowledge of that subject, experience in court, law, whatever it is, right? Other people may not be into that. They may have their bliss, and you don't hold them liable because the people that are at that point already recognize that they're in a state of bliss. However, once you present the material for them and they say, I don't want that, or they discredit you and because you're not wearing a suit, whatever the case may be, right? Now they have reached the level of accountability in some fashion, right? And it's just the same way you act. Look at you. Once you learn certain things, you can't unlearn them. Now, because you learn that, your whole life is different because it automatically upgraded your discipline, your actions, your responses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how does that tie into the community now that we've kind of covered politics a little bit? How does that bleed over into community affairs?
So I do want to take one issue with the word can't, that you
Okay.
can't unlearn. In fact, there's a famous quote from Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock, and said that the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who can't read and write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's actually what's most important, because especially when you think about public schooling, right? Public schooling is about teaching people how to be good actors in society. It's teaching people how to be compliant. Teacher, can I go to the bathroom? Oh, I need to shut up now. Oh, I need to behave in the way in which I'm told to behave. I need to follow the line. I need to color in between the lines, right? And so I disagree with the idea that we can't unlearn, but I think it's difficult. And I think that the vast majority of people tell themselves they can't unlearn, and therefore they can't, right? Henry Ford said it, whether you can or you can't, you're right. Or whether you say that you can or you can't, you're right.
Okay. Okay. Good good proposition. And in response to that, I'll ask you this question. Is it the fact that we are actually unlearning things, right? Because once you learn, it's now complete, right? Let's say, of course, there's infinity in everything, but let's say you reach a point where you feel like you've completed sixth grade. Okay. So once you complete sixth grade, when you go to seventh grade, you learn different things, right? Better things, better ways. By the time you get to 11th grade, you're doing calculus or something, right? So do you unlearn addition and subtraction? Or do you simply say, hey, multiplication is better in this application? So is it that we are actually unlearning things, or we just learned that what we already know, there's a better way? And maybe for the rest of the stuff we're doing or want to get to or to achieve, this will be the only way we utilize. But we still remember. So I don't think the only way to unlearn would be to forget, right?
Well, so I think there's two different questions there, right?
Okay.
Do we unlearn, and what is unlearning?
Okay. We got
Is
10 minutes left.
unlearning
Go.
forgetting? I don't think so, because I think you still take with you the lessons that you learned as you learned what you learned, right? Now, with that though, can't there be cases where two seemingly opposing things can be right at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, and here's I'm a quote nerd, as you may have noticed. Niels Bohr, who worked on the Manhattan Project, right, a Danish physicist, said that the opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. I think it's a very clever way of describing things that are metaphysical, right? Modern medicine, right? If I break my leg, right? I was a combat medic in the Army. I break my leg, well, then I know how to splint it. Right. And if I splint it, well, then it will likely grow in some approximation of back to fully formed or perfect formation. And so that can be true. If I have, a disease or just pain inside my body, yeah, I can take a pill and that can be true that it goes away, or I can heal with energy and I can just heal myself. And so depending on what you define as healing, if healing for you is just not feeling pain, well, then taking something that blocks your pain receptors is then healing. But if truly casting away the pain and stepping out of that pain is healing, well, then you're going to need to transcend to another profound truth.
So in order to define the question earlier, and thanks for sharing that visual, you can't define when something is complete until you define what like complete is to you. Like it's just that, and what I'm trying to say is how you made the contrast between, do you just want to not feel the pain, meaning that it might not be gone, but you don't feel it. The
Right.
problem that's causing it may still be there, but you just don't feel it right now. Or do you want to fully step out of the pain? So with that, look at America / the United States. And this is why people think people like me are really odd. Because when I view it, right, I see a lot of people talking about their pains. However, the question is, when you want to heal them or offer them healing, they don't want to fully step out of the pain. They just want to not feel it. Generally speaking, like
Okay. I like
economics.
where you're going with that.
We can't cure economics until we get rid of the currency, for example, right? But go ahead. Got about 7 minutes left. Let me hear what you guys say about that.
Okay, no, I like the way that you phrase that. And I think that you're right that, and this is where, so let's say as a healer, but if I bring on a client, for instance, right, are they coming to me so they can step out of their pain, or do they just want the pain to go away? They just want their problem solved, right? Same reason why you take your car to a mechanic, you want your problem solved. And so this is where you effectively, you sell them what they want, but you give them what they need. Right. And that's what a true mentor does. That's what a true coach does. Right. A basketball player, an elite basketball player is going to get sold on, playing for the Lakers because Steve Jackson was the head coach or something. Right. And working with Steve Jackson, just seeing the way that he's, tutored other people. Well, then little do you know that what he does is he instills in you a sense of compassion. Right. It's what you need. Oh my God, I have a compassion. Now this is my team. This is my peer group. And ain't nobody gonna mess with this family. And so and building that is what they needed, right? Because a lot of times ballers ball because they need to escape. And so realizing that there's nowhere to escape and now there's no reason to escape, well, let's actually enjoy it for the enjoyment and not keep escaping. And so that's where it's important to not just escape from the pain, but to be able to step out of the pain by offering something more transcendental.
I like that. I like that because I like the fact, because when you expand on, I think a lot of people became good at whatever it is they became good at: basketball, designing clothes, embroidery, whatever, right? Because they were escaping something, and that's where they found that peace, right? So I posed the question on Facebook the other day, and I said, "Hey, if everything was to become free tomorrow, you didn't need money for what you think are bills, house, cars, whatever you think you got payments for, right? Would you still do what you're doing right now to get paid?" I said, if you say no, then there lies the sickness. What do you think about that? Got about 4.5 minutes left, and then
I like that idea because if nothing else, right, you don't need to take it necessarily literally, but it would probably be a good thought experiment to do that and to realize that the areas that bubble up, right, where you would immediately need to come into defense of, right, well, no, I wouldn't, but I need to. Well, write that down. What does that answer? And just examine that and see where it goes, right? Doesn't mean that you're right or wrong. Doesn't mean that you're good or bad. Just examine that and realize that that's a place for some great self-reflection. And that's probably going to be a portal to some of the deepest levels of who you really are.
Excellent, excellent. So give some closing thoughts. We've pretty much covered inclusive perfection. I think a lot: society, politics, community. health, individual. I think people got a good gist of that, and I really like your analysis. Okay, so I appreciate you sharing with us all. Closing remarks on it in general. Tell them about remote healing. Tell them a little bit about yourself, where they can find you.
Yeah. Okay. So, right now, I'm going to be starting a new, more just ClickFunnels, and actually just having a landing page. So that'll be to be determined. Right now, you can reach me at towardgoodnesscoaching.com. But I'm finding that, in the same way that we talked about how you need to evolve, it seems that websites aren't as useful as they used to be, because it's just like a website is now waiting for people to come to me.
Mhm.
But the people who, as we just discussed, people are looking to escape from their pain. If people are running away, well, then if I'm truly going to be a service to these people, well, I better go out and find them rather than wait for them to come to me. And so I'm trying out new strategies to bring on more clientele. I'd say probably some of the most meaningful experiences I've had are with two ladies, where one was a lady who had she's had multiple heart attacks in her life, had bypasses, came to me because she had massive chest pain, and got rid of the chest pain. Uh, she got blood work back. Her cholesterol was down. But more than that, when your heart's not working properly, well, your blood's not getting where it needs to go. And so her energy level was at a baseline like 2 out of 10. And I got her to a new baseline of 9 out of 10. And this is what tells me, okay, her heart is now back to beating normally, right? And plus
Mhm.
her cholesterol is down. But then another lady who had dealing with a mental disorder just picked big scabs on her skin, on her shoulders, on her arms, and helping people tap into just a deep sense of love. Can't really sell self-love. Hey, Pasha, let me sell you some self-love, bro.
Walmart got it.
Yeah, I know, right? But it's something that you give them, right? And so now I'm giving them what they need. And so they come to me with this problem, but they walk away with just this entire radiance about them.
Awesome, awesome. Empowering through enlightenment.
Yeah.
Toward is TOWARD.
Yep. Toward.
Awesome,
Yep.
awesome.
Toward goodness.
All right. I'm gonna wrap it up here. Josh, say bye to the people.
Hey, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And may, love and truth always guide your path.
Always a perfect day. Pasha Paroh, YNet7. Thank you for tuning.